I think the cruelest thing about avoidant partners isn't the withdrawal, or the emotional unavailability, or even the hot and cold behavior that leaves you questioning your own sanity for months on end. It's what they do in the final moments, once they actually realize they've lost you for good. Once they understand you're not just temporarily upset, not creating distance to get their attention, not going through some phase that'll pass if they simply wait it out. Once they recognize that you're genuinely, completely, irreversibly done, you've stopped pursuing them. You've stopped voicing your needs. You've stopped trying to make them understand. You've stopped waiting for them to become someone different. You've stopped organizing your entire emotional life around whether they're present or distant, warm or cold, available or checked out. You've moved from hoping they'd change to accepting they won't, to actively building a life that no longer includes them at all. And it's in this exact moment, this recognition that they've truly lost you, that the ending is real and permanent, that something shifts inside them, not growth, not self-awareness, not the kind of genuine remorse that actually leads to lasting change. What shifts is their strategy. After you leave, an avoidant partner may appear suddenly changed and emotionally available, but lasting change is shown through consistent actions over time, not persuasive promises or temporary behavior during the crisis of separation. So what does this final move actually look like, and why does it show up at this specific moment? It isn't random behavior at all. It's a strategic response deployed the instant they recognize they've lost control of the situation and need to regain it before you're completely out of reach. Understanding the shape of this move helps you recognize it the moment it arrives. Suddenly, they become everything you always needed them to be. Emotionally available, consistently present, verbally affirming, physically affectionate, finally showing you the version of themselves you spent the whole relationship begging for, but never actually received until now. The person who couldn't text you back reliably is suddenly reaching out multiple times a day. The person who could never articulate their feelings is suddenly expressing themselves in ways that seem raw and genuine. The person who couldn't commit to plans more than a day in advance is suddenly talking about the future with real specificity and enthusiasm. The partner who kept physical distance is suddenly initiating affection and closeness. They're offering you everything the relationship was missing this whole time: attention, validation, presence, commitment, emotional availability, real future planning. This sudden transformation feels jarring precisely because it's so dramatically different from everything you experienced before. And it arrives exactly when you've fully committed to leaving, when you've accepted they simply couldn't give you what you needed, when you've made peace with the loss and started rebuilding a life without them in it. That timing is never a coincidence. They're suddenly offering what you needed specifically because you've stopped needing it from them, specifically because your leaving finally proved you were serious, specifically because this has become the only strategy left that might actually work to bring you back. They start making grand gestures or bold declarations, the exact kind that would have resolved so many of your relationship's problems if only they'd been willing to make them earlier, back when you were actually asking for them. Maybe they suddenly commit to things they always refused before, moving in together, meeting your family, making the relationship visibly official in ways they'd been withholding this entire time. Maybe there are big romantic gestures, showing up at your door with flowers, planning elaborate dates, writing long, heartfelt letters, saying every single thing you always wanted to hear, making public declarations about their feelings, demonstrating effort and investment that was completely absent throughout the actual relationship. These gestures are engineered to overwhelm your logical assessment of the situation with raw emotional impact. They're demonstrating through action that they're finally willing to do what you needed, that they finally understand what the relationship required of them, that they're finally ready to deliver it. And the part of you that spent months or years wishing for exactly these gestures, that read their refusal to make them as proof they simply didn't care enough, that partly left because these gestures never came, that part of you wants so badly to believe they mean something real now, that they mean the person finally sees your worth, that they mean readiness has finally arrived. They'll often claim to have had some major breakthrough or revelation about their own patterns and about what you actually meant to them, framing your leaving as the wake-up call that finally forced them to see what they'd been too defended to see before. The story they tell is compelling precisely because it's the exact story you've been hoping to hear all along. Losing you made me realize what my patterns were actually costing me. I couldn't see it clearly before, but I see it now. You were right about all of it. I took you for granted. I didn't appreciate what I had in front of me. I was too afraid to let myself be vulnerable. But losing you changed something in me. I finally understand what you were trying to tell me this whole time. I understand now exactly what I need to work on. Losing you taught me something, and I'm different because of it. That narrative is seductive because it validates everything you went through. It confirms your perceptions were accurate all along. It confirms they really were the problem. It confirms your decision to leave was justified. And it offers hope that your leaving accomplished what your staying never could, that the loss itself finally created the conditions for real change. The story positions you as the catalyst for their growth, makes your suffering feel meaningful by framing it as necessary for their awakening, and suggests reconciliation would look completely different this time because they've fundamentally shifted as a person. They'll often produce evidence of change that seems genuinely substantial. Therapy appointments, books about attachment theory, specific behavioral changes they claim to have already implemented, detailed plans for addressing their patterns going forward. Unlike all the previous times their promises were just empty words, now they're apparently backing everything up with real evidence. They show you the therapist's business card. They send photos of self-help books with passages highlighted. They describe specific insights they've supposedly gained about their own attachment style. They walk you through behavioral changes they've already made, not just future promises, but seemingly concrete actions already taken. They might even try to involve you directly in their healing process, asking you to read attachment articles together, sharing what they're learning in therapy, asking for your input on their growth plan. This kind of evidence feels different from the empty promises of before because it seems concrete, detailed, and demonstrates a real investment of time, energy, and money into actually addressing the underlying issues. And because you've probably told them countless times that they needed therapy or needed to confront their patterns, watching them apparently do exactly what you suggested feels like validation, like proof you were right all along, proof they finally heard you, proof that real change might genuinely be possible. They become vulnerable in ways they never allowed themselves to be throughout the actual relationship, sharing fears, old wounds, and apologies that make them seem finally emotionally available and self-aware. The person who never showed emotion is suddenly crying in front of you. The person who never apologized is offering detailed, specific apologies. The one who never opened up about their inner life is suddenly talking about their childhood wounds, their fears, their regrets, their genuine pain over losing you. That vulnerability carries real power because it's exactly what was missing the entire time you were together. You wanted them to be emotionally available. You wanted them to actually share what they were feeling. You wanted them to acknowledge their own patterns and their own wounds. And now seemingly they're doing precisely that. They're telling you about the abandonment they experienced as a child that shaped their attachment wounds. They're explaining how their fear of real intimacy developed and why it made them push you away. They're specifically acknowledging how their behavior hurt you. This kind of vulnerability creates the sense that they've finally dropped their defenses, that you're finally seeing the real them, that the emotional availability you always needed is finally being offered to you. They create a sense of urgency around getting back together, suggesting this window of openness and growth won't stay open forever, that you need to act now to benefit from their newfound capacity for connection, that waiting risks losing the opportunity entirely. Sometimes they'll frame it explicitly. I'm in this growth phase right now, and I want to do this work with you, but I can't promise I'll stay in this open place if you don't give me another chance. Other times, the urgency shows up more subtly. They mention moving away soon, or a job offer somewhere else, or circumstances shifting that will make reconciliation harder if you don't decide now. They might mention that other people are interested in them, not framed as a direct threat exactly, but as information meant to suggest they won't remain available indefinitely. That urgency exists specifically to prevent you from taking the time you actually need to assess whether their change is real or whether this is manipulation dressed up convincingly. It's built to make you act on emotion instead of logic, to make you grab the opportunity before it supposedly disappears, rather than carefully evaluating whether it's real in the first place. The urgency is the exact mechanism pushing you to return before you've had enough time to see whether their apparent change actually holds or whether it's just a temporary performance. Now let's talk about why this particular final move is so much more dangerous than any manipulation that came before it. It isn't just another entry in a long series of manipulations you've already learned to recognize. It's qualitatively different from everything that preceded it, in ways that make it uniquely dangerous and uniquely capable of pulling you back into the exact dynamic you worked so hard to escape. It arrives at a moment of maximum vulnerability, right when you've invested everything into leaving, and your defenses are still organized around protecting yourself from their old familiar patterns, not from this new and far more sophisticated approach. You built real defenses during the relationship. You learned to recognize their withdrawal when it happened. You learned to protect yourself from the hot and cold cycling. You learned not to believe empty promises anymore. Those defenses were adequate for managing the relationship as it existed, but you've just completed the extraordinarily difficult work of actually leaving. You're emotionally exhausted, you're grieving. You're in a genuinely vulnerable state where part of you desperately wants to believe the leaving wasn't necessary, that they've truly changed, that you could have what you wanted all along without having to accept a permanent loss. This move offers you exactly what you wanted most, packaged in a way that makes it look like your boundary setting finally worked, creating the illusion that the pain and the leaving weren't wasted, but were necessary steps toward their transformation. Throughout the relationship, you tried everything to get them to change. You communicated your needs clearly. You expressed your pain honestly. You explained their patterns to them directly. You gave them chance after chance. Nothing worked. They didn't change. Eventually you left, not because you wanted to, but because you finally accepted they couldn't or wouldn't give you what you needed. Now here they are, apparently offering exactly that. The interpretation this invites is genuinely seductive. Your leaving worked, your boundaries were effective, the pain was necessary, they needed to lose you in order to finally see your value. This interpretation makes all the suffering feel meaningful, makes leaving feel justified, makes reconciliation feel like a reward for the hardest choice you've ever made. But this interpretation is exactly what the manipulation is engineered to create. The truth underneath it is simpler and far more devastating. They're offering you what you needed, not because they've actually changed, but because offering it is the only strategy left that might get you back. And once you're back, that offer quietly disappears and the old patterns return because the offer was never real transformation to begin with. It was strategic manipulation deployed at the exact moment it would be most effective. It exploits your hope and your love in ways their previous behavior never quite managed to. This time, they're not just triggering your anxiety, they're activating your deepest wishes about what the relationship could actually become. Previous manipulation worked by triggering fear, fear of abandonment, fear of loss, fear that you simply weren't good enough. Those fears kept you trapped, but they also kept you miserable the entire time. This final move is more sophisticated precisely because it doesn't trigger fear at all. It triggers hope. Hope that they finally become capable of loving you the way you need. Hope that the relationship could finally become everything you always sensed it could be. Hope that your patience and your love weren't wasted, but were seeds finally bearing fruit. Hope that you could have both the person you love and the healthy relationship you actually need. Hope is simply more powerful than fear at keeping you engaged because hope feels good. It doesn't register as manipulation. It feels like genuine possibility, like a dream finally coming true. And because you love them, because you've always loved them, the possibility of having them back and having them be different is so appealing that you want desperately to believe it's real, even while the logical part of your mind is quietly raising every warning flag it has. The apparent evidence they provide makes the manipulation much harder to spot, because it isn't just words anymore. It seems to be backed by real actions that suggest genuine effort. Empty promises are easy to dismiss once you've heard them enough times. I'll change means basically nothing after the fifth time it's said with no corresponding action behind it. But therapy appointments aren't just words. Books about attachment aren't just promises. Detailed, vulnerable conversations about their childhood wounds aren't empty statements on their face. These things feel like evidence, and evidence is exactly what you needed all along to believe real change was possible. The manipulation works specifically because it isn't simply repeating what already failed before. It's offering what looks like proof that this time is genuinely different. That evidence makes it harder for your logical mind to dismiss what's happening as just another cycle of manipulation. It makes friends and family less certain in their advice to stay away. It makes you question whether holding your boundary is actual self-protection or whether it's self-sabotage preventing you from accepting real change. That evidence is the exact mechanism that makes this manipulation sophisticated enough to slip past your defenses and past the warnings from the people who support you. They're timing this move to intercept you before you've fully healed, catching you while you're still emotionally connected, still grieving, still in the stage where reconciliation feels genuinely possible, rather than waiting until you've truly moved on. If they waited 6 months or a year, you'd be in a completely different emotional place. You'd have grieved properly, you'd have healed, you'd have rebuilt your life in ways that no longer include them. You might have even moved on to someone else entirely. You'd be far less likely to believe their performance because you'd have the emotional distance and clarity that time and real healing provide. But they're not waiting for any of that. They're making their move now, while you're still raw from leaving, while you still love them in the present tense rather than as a fading memory, while the grief is fresh and the loss still aches, and part of you is quietly wishing there was some way to make it work after all. The timing is deliberate. They're catching you when you're most susceptible, when you haven't yet completed the grieving process, when you're still in the stage where you do almost anything just to make the pain stop, when the possibility of having them back feels like relief rather than a return to the very source of your pain. The timing is calculated specifically to maximize the chances you'll return before you've healed enough to see their move clearly for exactly what it is. This move is also designed to transfer guilt and responsibility onto you if you refuse to return, framing you as the one rejecting change, the one being unforgiving, the one throwing away a real opportunity for connection. This is one of the most insidious parts of the whole dynamic. Throughout the relationship, they were the problem, their patterns, their emotional unavailability, their inability to meet your needs. You were the one trying, the one being patient, the one extending chance after chance. But this final move flips that entire script. Now, supposedly, they're the one trying, they're the one changing, they're the one doing the work, and you're the one saying no. That inversion is specifically designed to shift guilt onto your shoulders. If you don't return, you're the one rejecting someone who claims to be genuinely trying. You're the one being unforgiving. You're the one throwing away real potential for connection because you can't let go of past hurt. You're the one being rigid and closed off while they're being vulnerable and open. That guilt is designed to overwhelm your logical assessment and your self-protective instincts entirely. It's built to make holding your boundary feel like the wrong choice, like you're being petty or holding a grudge, or simply refusing to accept real growth when it's offered to you. And this guilt can be powerful enough to actually pull you back, not because you genuinely believe they've changed, but because you can't tolerate the discomfort of rejecting someone who appears, on the surface, to be trying so hard. So how do you tell the difference between real transformation and this kind of sophisticated manipulation? The distinction can be subtle, but there are specific markers that help separate the two and protect you from being pulled back into a dynamic that hasn't actually changed underneath its convincing new surface. Genuine change unfolds slowly, over a sustained period, through work that happens whether you're watching or not. A sudden transformation that lines up perfectly with the timing of your leaving is performance, not real healing. Actual recovery from avoidant attachment patterns takes real time. It requires sustained therapeutic work, Not 1 or 2 sessions, but months or years of consistent work with someone who specializes in attachment wounds specifically. It requires practicing new behaviors in low-stakes settings long before those behaviors become reliable inside an intimate relationship. It requires actually working through the childhood wounds that created these patterns in the first place. It requires building new neural pathways through repeated practice of different responses over time. This is genuinely slow work. It doesn't happen in the 2 weeks or 2 months between when you left and when they suddenly show up transformed. If their change appeared suddenly and conveniently at the exact moment you left, that's performance built to win you back, not authentic transformation. Real change would already be underway, whether or not you were there to witness it. They'd have been in therapy for 6 months before ever reaching out. They'd have done substantial internal work well before contacting you. They'd have demonstrated changed behavior in other relationships too, with friends, with family, with co-workers, not just aimed at winning you back specifically. Sudden change that appears precisely when it's needed to bring you back is manipulation, plain and simple. Genuine transformation tends to be uncomfortable and messy, full of setbacks and real struggle. If what they're presenting is a perfectly polished version of change, with no acknowledgement of difficulty and no sign of ever slipping back into old patterns, it's not authentic. Real change is genuinely hard. Real growth includes setbacks along the way. Someone actually working through avoidant attachment patterns would have days where vulnerability feels like a real struggle, moments where the old urge to withdraw resurfaces and they have to consciously fight against it. They'd acknowledge openly that the work is difficult, that they're not perfect at it yet, but that they remain committed to continuing it. The way they'd talk about it would be messy. I'm really trying, but sometimes that old fear still creeps in, and I have to remind myself to stay present. I'm working through it with my therapist. Some days are just harder than others. That kind of messiness is actually a marker of authenticity. But if what you're seeing is a perfectly transformed version with no struggle, no setbacks, total transformation on display, that's performance. Real people doing real healing work are imperfect while they do it. A polished, flawless presentation is usually a sign that what you're witnessing isn't genuine work at all, but a strategic performance built to be as convincing as possible. Someone genuinely changing is willing to give you real space and time to decide, without pressure or manufactured urgency. If their change is real, they understand that you need time. They understand you'll need to see sustained change over a long stretch before you could possibly trust them again. They understand your skepticism is completely warranted given everything that's happened. They'd say something like, I understand you need time. I understand you'd need to see this hold steady over months before you could trust it again. I'm not asking you to come back right now. I just wanted you to know I'm doing this work. Take whatever time you need. I'm going to keep doing this regardless of whether you ever decide to give me another chance. That's what genuine change actually sounds like. Patient, understanding, free of pressure, focused on doing the work for its own sake rather than using it as leverage for reconciliation. But if they're manufacturing urgency, if they're implying you need to decide right now, if they're suggesting the window is about to close, if they're making you feel like you'll lose your one shot if you don't act quickly, that urgency itself is the manipulation. They're trying to prevent you from taking the time you'd actually need to properly assess whether any of this change is real. Real change would also be confirmed by other people who know them, not just visible to you, and not just in the narrow context of trying to win you back. If their transformation were genuine, the people in their life would notice it too. Their friends would comment on how different they seem. Their family would see real shifts in how they communicate and relate to others. Co-workers or other people in their orbit would notice behavioral changes as well. The therapist they claim to be seeing would be able to confirm they're actually doing the work, and they'd be perfectly willing to let you verify that directly if you wanted to. Genuine change tends to be holistic. It touches every relationship and every context in someone's life, not just the one romantic relationship they're trying to win back. But if the change is only visible to you, only showing up in the specific behaviors tied to your exact complaints, only appearing in the context of trying to get you back, that's targeted performance. That's someone acting the way they think you need them to act in order to secure your return. Ask about the rest of their life. Ask whether their therapist would actually confirm what they're telling you. Ask their friends if they've genuinely noticed a difference. Real change gets confirmed from multiple directions. Manipulation only shows up in the one context specifically designed to convince you. And finally, someone genuinely changing takes full, unqualified responsibility for how the relationship ended, without deflecting blame back onto you or onto circumstances outside their control. Manipulation often includes subtle blame shifting, even inside what sounds, on the surface, like a real apology. Listen closely to how they actually describe what happened. Genuine accountability sounds like this: I damaged something valuable because of my own patterns. My fear kept me from giving you what you needed. The relationship ended because I couldn't show up the way you deserved, and that's entirely my responsibility, my failure. No qualifications attached. No, but you were also. No, if you'd only been more patient. No, if the timing had been different. No deflection onto circumstances or onto your behavior. Just pure, unqualified ownership. But manipulation frequently hides subtle blame shifting inside what sounds like an apology on the surface. I know I had my own issues, but the pressure I felt from you made it harder for me to actually work through them. I should have communicated better, but you also didn't always give me the space I needed to process things on my own.